I married a widower whose first wife died in a tragic romantic boating accident. I just found her hidden diary. It wasn't an accident. She faked her death to escape him, and the final entry reads, "I hope whoever finds this is smarter than I was." David's grief was the first thing I fell in love with. It wasn't a loud or messy grief. It was a quiet, noble, and deeply romantic sorrow that clung to him like the scent of the sea. His first wife, Laura, had been taken from him in a boating accident 3 years before we met. The story was the stuff of tragic legends, a story our friends and even I would retell with a kind of reverent awe. They were sailing on their anniversary, a surprise trip he had planned. A sudden, violent squall had capsized their small boat. He had clung to her hand in the churning, icy water, but a wave, monstrous and cruel, had torn them apart. He was found hours later, clinging to the wreckage, hypothermic and half-drowned. Her body was never recovered. This story was the foundation of the man I married. It explained his quiet intensity, his profound appreciation for the small, beautiful moments of life. It was why he held me a little tighter at night, while he always said, "I love you," before leaving the house. He had seen the fragility of life up close, and it had made him the most attentive, present, and loving husband I could have ever imagined. I wasn't replacing Laura. I was the woman who had, against all odds, taught his heart to beat again. Our marriage wasn't just a partnership. It was a testament to hope and healing. We live in the same house he shared with her, a beautiful old place on a cliff overlooking the water. At first, it felt strange, like I was an intruder in their perfect life. But David, with his gentle patience, had helped me make it our own. The only space that remained untouched was a small, locked room in the attic. He called it Laura's room, a place where he kept her things. He said he wasn't ready to go through it, and I understood. His grief had its own timeline, and I would never rush it. Today, 10 years into our marriage, a plumber needed access to some old pipes that ran through that attic room. David was at a conference out of state. He left me the key, a small, ornate silver key telling me it was probably time. "You can handle it," he'd said, his voice full of trust. "Maybe it's a good first step." My heart ached for him. I unlocked the door, the air inside still and thick with the scent of lavender and old paper. The room was a time capsule. Clothes were folded neatly in an open suitcase on the bed. Books were stacked on a nightstand. It was the room of a woman who was expecting to come home. I was being careful, respectful, moving things to give the plumber access, when a floorboard beneath a small rug gave way slightly. It was loose. My curiosity, a feeling I hadn't felt in this house before, was piqued. I lifted the rug and pried at the board. It came up easily. Beneath it, nestled in the dark space between the joists, was a small, leather-bound book, a diary. Laura's diary. My first instinct was to close the floorboard and walk away. This felt too private, a violation of the woman whose ghost I had so respectfully lived alongside. But I was the woman of the house now. This was my history too, in a way. With trembling hands, I opened it. The first entries were filled with love, with details of her perfect life with David. But as I read on, the tone began to shift. A thread of fear, a subtle, creeping unease began to weave its way through the pages. She wrote about his attentiveness becoming a form of surveillance, his romantic gestures feeling like acts of control. She wrote about small, strange accidents, her car keys going missing before a job interview, a lunch with her sister being forgotten by David. The final few pages were written in a frantic, terrified scrawl. The handwriting was jagged, the ink smudged in places, as if by tears. She detailed a plan, a desperate, high-stakes escape. And then I read the final entry, dated the morning of their anniversary, the day of the accident. He's planning something for the boat. He calls it a surprise, but his eyes are wrong. He's been practicing knots. He thinks he's broken me, that I don't have the strength to leave. But he's wrong. This has to work. This is my only way out. I'm leaving this here just in case. A message in a bottle. If someone is reading this, it means I didn't make it, or it means he's found someone new. He will tell you a beautiful, tragic story. He is the best storyteller I have ever known. Do not believe him. My blood ran cold. I flipped to the very last page. There, written in the center of the page in a clear, steady hand, were the final, chilling words. A direct message to me across time and space. I hope whoever finds this is smarter than I was. The final sentence of the diary was a lit match dropped into the dry tinder of my life. I hope whoever finds this is smarter than I was. It wasn't just a warning, it was a verdict. A judgment on the woman who had come after, the woman who had believed the beautiful, tragic story. Me. My blood roared in my ears, a sound like the churning water that had supposedly claimed Laura's life. I slammed the diary shut, the leather cover feeling slick and dangerous in my trembling hands. This object, this small book of secrets, had just detonated the foundations of my world. David, my gentle, grieving, and profoundly loving husband, was a monster. His romantic sorrow wasn't a wound, it was a mask. His attentiveness wasn't love, it was surveillance. "Ma'am, all set up here." The plumber's voice, cheerful and mundane, shot through the silence of the attic. I gasped, scrambling to my feet, clutching the diary to my chest like a shield. I had forgotten he was there. I had forgotten there was a world outside this dusty, lavender-scented tomb. "I'll be right there," I called out, my voice a high, thin stranger's. My mind raced. I couldn't put the diary back. The loose floorboard was no longer a hiding place. It was a crime scene. He would know. If he ever came into this room, he would check. I looked around the room at Laura's perfectly preserved life. There was nowhere to hide something that didn't belong to her. My eyes landed on my own handbag, sitting by the door where I had left it. With frantic, clumsy movements, I unzipped the main compartment, shoved the diary inside, and buried it beneath my wallet and keys. A secret within a secret. My secret now. I walked out of the attic, closing the door and locking it, the small silver key feeling cold and heavy in my palm. The plumber was wiping his hands on a rag in the hallway. He smiled at me. A normal man at the end of a normal job. Should be all good now. No more leaks. "Thank you," I said, the words feeling like shards of glass in my mouth. "Thank you so much." I showed him out, my movements stiff and robotic. I smiled. I thanked him again. I closed the front door. And then I leaned against it, the solid wood a temporary barrier against the lie my life had become. I was alone in the house again, alone with the truth. I pulled the diary from my bag and sank onto the living room sofa. I read the final entry again, the words no less horrifying on the second reading. Then I started from the beginning, devouring the entire book, my 10-year marriage unraveling with every page I turned. I saw David in a new, terrifying light. Laura's words painted a portrait of a man obsessed with control, a man whose love was a form of suffocation. She wrote about him organizing her closet and getting rid of clothes he deemed inappropriate, about him reading her emails under the guise of fixing the computer, about him subtly, expertly isolating her from her friends, framing his jealousy as a deep romantic need to have her all to himself. Every story resonated with a sickening familiarity. David's helpful suggestions about my own friendships, his dislike for a particular dress I owned, the way he always seemed to know my schedule, my plans, my conversations, with an intuition I had mistaken for a deep soulmate connection. It wasn't intuition. It was a methodology. He hadn't changed. He had just gotten a new subject. And the grief, the noble, romantic grief I had so admired, what was it really? Was it sadness over her death? Or was it a cold, burning rage that she had outsmarted him, that she had escaped his control in the one way he could not follow? The tragic story he told wasn't a memory. It was a cover story, a brilliant piece of fiction that allowed him to be both the victim and the hero, while recasting his escaped prisoner as a tragic, sainted ghost. My phone rang. The cheerful, chirping ringtone of violent intrusion.
It was him. The screen lit up with his picture, his warm, familiar smile, a horrifying mask. My heart leapt into my throat. For 10 years, his call had been a comfort. Now, it was a threat. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the accept button. What would I say? How could I possibly speak to him, my voice not cracking with the weight of this knowledge? But not answering would be a deviation from the norm, a red flag. He would notice. He noticed everything. With a trembling hand, I answered the call. "Hey, you." His voice came through the speaker, warm and loving as always. "I was just thinking about you. Is everything okay at the house?" "Everything's fine," I managed to say, my voice a tight, strained whisper. "The plumber is gone. It's all fixed." "Good. I miss you. I can't wait to be home tomorrow." Tomorrow. The word landed like a death sentence. He was coming back. The monster was coming home. "I miss you too," I lied. The words almost choked me. "I love you, Sarah," he said, his voice soft and sincere. "I love you," I replied. The 3 words, a final, desperate act of survival. I hung up the phone, and a single, silent tear rolled down my cheek. Laura's final words echoed in my mind. I hope whoever finds this is smarter than I was. The game had just begun, and I had to learn the rules fast. The night that followed was a descent into a cold, waking nightmare. Every creak of the old house, every sigh of the wind outside the windows was a potential threat. I was a trespasser in my own home, a home that was no longer a sanctuary, but a meticulously curated museum of David's lies. Laura's ghost was no longer a sad, romantic presence. She was a co-conspirator, a fellow prisoner who had left me a map to the escape route. I didn't sleep. I sat on the living room sofa, the diary in my lap, the house dark around me. My mind was a whirlwind of frantic, paranoid activity. I was deconstructing the last 10 years, searching for the clues I had missed, the red flags I had mistaken for bouquets of roses. His control over our finances, which I had seen as his responsible, caring nature, now looked like a way to limit my independence. His dislike for my ambition to return to work after we got married, which he had framed as a romantic desire to take care of me, was a clear strategy to keep me isolated, dependent. The way he would gently dismiss my opinions in front of our friends, making it seem like a charming joke, "Oh, Sarah, always the dreamer," was a subtle, systematic erosion of my credibility. He had built a perfect, beautiful cage for me, just as he had for Laura. The only difference was that my cage was gilded with a decade of feigned kindness and a shared tragic past. Laura had seen the bars. I had seen a work of art. The most terrifying realization was that he had learned from his mistake. Laura had friends, a career, a life outside of him. She had the resources and the independence to plan an escape. When he met me, he had chosen his next subject more carefully. I was new to the area, a quiet woman recovering from a recent heartbreak of my own. I was the perfect, malleable material for his next masterpiece of control. He hadn't just replaced Laura, he had upgraded his methodology. By the time the gray light of dawn began to creep through the windows, I knew 2 things with absolute certainty. First, I could not confront him directly. He was a master manipulator. He would twist my words, deny everything, and use my emotional state to paint me as unstable, hysterical. He would turn Laura's diary into the delusional fantasy of a jealous second wife. He had 10 years of perfect husband credibility on his side. I had a dead women's secret book. Second, I could not just run. Laura had run, and he had simply started again.
If I vanished, he would create a new tragic story. The beloved second wife lost to a sudden depression, perhaps. He would grieve, the town would comfort him, and in a few years, there would be a third woman, another unsuspecting subject for his quiet, methodical destruction. I couldn't let that happen. Exposing him wasn't just about saving myself. It was about avenging Laura and preventing a future victim. My plan needed to be as cold and as calculated as his own methods. He had spent years studying his subjects. Now, I had to study him. The diary was my textbook. It showed me his tactics, his patterns, his vulnerabilities. His greatest strength and his greatest weakness was his narrative, the story of the grieving hero. He had to maintain that story at all costs. My plan began to form around that central fact. I wouldn't attack the man, I would attack the story. When David was due to arrive home that afternoon, I was ready. I had showered and dressed, not in my usual comfortable clothes, but in a smart, elegant dress he particularly liked. I had done my hair and makeup. I was playing the part of the loving, stable wife waiting for her husband to return. I had also made some preparations. I had taken the diary and re-hidden it, not in the house, but in a waterproof bag buried deep under a loose stone in the garden wall, a place he would never think to look. Then I went into Laura's room in the attic. I opened her closet, found an old, elegant-looking wooden box, a jewelry box perhaps, and I pried the lock open. I put the small silver key to the attic room inside it. Then I took the box and I placed it back under the same loose floorboard where I had found the diary. I replaced the rug. It was a decoy, a trap for a future search. When I heard his car pull into the driveway, my heart began to pound a frantic, terrified rhythm, but I stilled it with a cold resolve. The actress was taking the stage. I opened the front door before he could put his key in the lock. A bright, welcoming smile plastered on my face. "You're home," I said, my voice full of a warmth that felt like acid in my throat. He looked surprised, then pleased. "I am," he said, dropping his bags and pulling me into a hug. His arms around me felt like a cage. I forced myself not to stiffen. I hugged him back. "I missed you," he said into my hair. "I missed you more," I lied, my smile unwavering. "I have a surprise for you, something I think we should do together." He pulled back, his eyes full of a pleased curiosity. "What is it?" "I was thinking," I said, my voice full of a gentle, therapeutic sincerity. "It's been 10 years, and you've been so strong. But I think it's time we finally went through Laura's room together. I think it's time to let her go." My proposition hung in the air, a carefully crafted test. I watched his face for any flicker of panic, any sign of a man whose secret crime scene was about to be revisited. But David was a master. His expression shifted from surprise, not to fear, but to a look of profound, tender gratitude. He took my hands in his grip warm and sincere. "Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't know what to say. After all these years, for you to be the one to suggest it, you are the kindest, most incredible woman in the world." He was perfect. The loving husband, moved to tears by his wife's empathy. He was either completely innocent, and I was losing my mind, or he was the most convincing actor I had ever seen. The diary in my garden told me it was the latter. He wasn't scared of the room. He was confident in his stagecraft. He believed his secrets were safely buried. My suggestion wasn't a threat, it was an opportunity for him to give another award-winning performance as the grieving widower. "We don't have to do it today," I said, playing my part, the gentle, supportive wife. "Just whenever you're ready." "No," he said, his jaw set with a look of noble resolve.
You're right. It's time. Let's do it now. Together. The walk up the stairs to the attic felt like a death march. He led the way, his hand resting on the small of my back, a gesture of unity that felt like a guard escorting a prisoner. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I was leading him into a trap, but I felt like the one who was about to be ensnared. He unlocked the small silver key, his hand steady. He pushed open the door to the room that was, in essence, a monument to his lie. The air was still and smelled of lavender. Sunlight streamed through the single dusty window. "Where do we even begin?" he asked, his voice a soft, mournful whisper. I let him lead. I watched as he picked up a book from her nightstand, a thumbed copy of a poetry anthology. He read a few lines aloud, his voice cracking with just the right amount of emotion. He opened the suitcase on her bed and touched a folded silk scarf, a look of distant, tragic memory. He was performing his grief, and he was brilliant. I was his audience, nodding, offering quiet words of support. "That must be so hard," I'd say. "We can stop if this is too much." Each word of encouragement was a lie, a move in a silent, deadly chess game. My own heart was a block of ice. I was looking at the room not as a shrine, but as a crime scene. I saw the loose floorboard under the rug, and I felt a jolt of adrenaline. The decoy was in place. Now I just had to lead him to it. We spent an hour sorting through her things, placing them into boxes for donation. It was a surreal, macabre pantomime of closure. Finally, we were left with just the furniture. "I guess that's everything," he said, a final theatrical sigh of relief and sadness. "What about under the rug?" I asked, my voice casual, innocent. He frowned. "What about it?" It's a little uneven," I said, walking over and nudging the small rug with my foot. "It feels like there's a loose board underneath. We should probably fix it before we try to move the bed." I saw it then, a flicker. Just a fraction of a second, but it was there. A shadow of something cold and calculating in his eyes before the mask of gentle sadness slid back into place. He knew. He knew about the loose board. It had been her hiding place, and he had known about it all along. "You're right," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Good eye." He knelt, his movements slow and deliberate, and lifted the corner of the rug. He saw the edges of the loose board. He didn't seem surprised. He looked up at me, a sad, weary smile on his face. "I guess there's one last secret to uncover," he said. He pried the board up with his fingertips. He reached into the dark space and his hand closed around the wooden box I had planted. He pulled it out and placed it on the floor between us. "What is it?" I asked, my voice a perfect imitation of gentle curiosity. He looked at the box, then at me, his eyes full of a carefully crafted sorrow. I think it's her jewelry box," he said. "I never knew she kept it here." He tried the lid. "It's locked." "Maybe there's a key?" I prompted. He felt around in the dark space again, and his fingers closed around the small silver key I had put there. He held it up. "Looks like it," he said. He inserted the key, unlocked the box, and slowly, with the reverence of an archaeologist opening a pharaoh's tomb, he lifted the lid, and he stared, in perfect feigned surprise, at the empty, velvet-lined interior. He looked up at me, his face a masterpiece of heartbroken confusion. "It's empty! Why would she hide an empty box?" I had expected him to be relieved, to see the empty box and believe his secret was safe. But this was even better. He was using the empty box to deepen the mystery of his tragic, lost wife. He was adding another layer to his fiction, right in front of my eyes. It was my move. "Maybe it's not empty," I said, my voice soft. I reached into my pocket. My hand closed around the real key to this mystery, the key to a safe deposit box at the downtown bank, a key I had found tucked into the spine of Laura's diary, a final, brilliant breadcrumb she had left behind. I held it out to him, letting it glint in the dusty sunlight. "I found this," I said, my voice still gentle but with an edge of steel he had never heard before. "It was in one of her poetry books.
It was her mother's, apparently. I wonder what's inside. The key lay in the palm of my hand, a small, unassuming piece of metal that had just become the most dangerous object in the room. David stared at it, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, the mask slipped completely. His performance of the grieving husband dissolved, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock, a flash of the raw panic of a master strategist whose opponent has just made an impossible, game-changing move. He had expected the attic to be the final act of his play, a cathartic performance of closure. He had been prepared for the empty box, ready to spin it into another tragic thread of Laura's mysterious narrative. He was not prepared for this. He was not prepared for a physical object from the outside world, a key connected Laura's ghost to a tangible, verifiable location. His recovery was fast, a testament to his years of practice, but I saw the flicker. The mask of gentle confusion slid back into place, but it was clumsier this time, ill-fitting. A key? Her mother's? Why would you have that? I was tidying up her books, I said, the lie coming easily now. I was learning his language. It just fell out. I figured it must be for something important. My tone was pure innocence, the helpful wife who had stumbled upon a forgotten piece of her husband's past. He reached for the key, but I closed my hand around it. "We should go," I said, my voice bright, decisive. "We should go to the bank, together. It feels important, like it's a part of the process, a final message from her, you know?" I had him trapped. How could the loving, supportive husband, the man who was finally letting go, refuse such a reasonable, emotionally significant request? To object would be to reveal that he had something to fear. His own narrative had become my cage for him. He swallowed hard, the sound audible in the quiet attic. "Of course," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're right. Let's go." The drive to the bank was a symphony of suffocating silence. David drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. He tried to make small talk, to comment on the weather, on a new shop that had opened, but his voice was strained, the easy charm gone. He was a man on his way to the gallows, and I was the one walking him there. I sat in the passenger seat, calm and composed, my purse in my lap. Inside, tucked into a side pocket, was the diary. The key was the bait, but the diary was the hook, and I was about to set it. The bank was a cold marble and glass mausoleum. The process of accessing the safe deposit box was formal, bureaucratic, and deliciously slow. A bank employee led us into the vault, a massive, gleaming steel door swinging open to reveal a wall of small, numbered metal boxes. David's face was pale, his breathing shallow. The air was thick with the smell of old money and sealed secrets. The employee located the box and slid a long, thin metal container from the wall. He placed it on a small table in a private viewing room and left, closing the door behind him. We were along with the final piece of Laura's puzzle. David stared at the metal box as if it were a coffin. I'm not sure I can do this, Sarah," he whispered, his voice trembling. It was a last-ditch effort, a final performance of the fragile, grieving widower. "It's okay," I said, my voice soft but firm. "I'm here." I placed my hand on the lid of the box. "We'll do it together." I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no jewelry, no sentimental keepsakes. There were only documents, neatly arranged. On the very top was a passport. The name on it was Laura Ann Miller, but the picture was of my Laura. Her hair a different color, a small, defiant smile on her face. Beneath the passport was a birth certificate with the same name. And under that, a series of bank statements for an account with a substantial balance, showing a series of small, regular withdrawals from locations all over the world for the past 10 years. David made a small, strangled sound in the back of his throat. He looked at the documents, at the proof of a life he had declared over, and the last of his composure shattered. This was a story he couldn't control, a truth he couldn't twist. I let him absorb the shock for a long, silent moment. Then I reached into my handbag. I pulled out the leather-bound diary and placed it on the table next to the passport.
She was smarter than you thought, I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of a decade of lies. He looked from the passport to the diary, then to my face. The confusion, the grief, the love, it all vanished. His eyes, for the first time, were completely unmasked. And what I saw there was not the face of a heartbroken man. It was the cold, flat, empty rage of a tyrant who had just realized his prisoner had not only escaped, but had won the war. The transformation was absolute and terrifying. The gentle, grieving man I had known for a decade vanished as if he had never existed. In his place was a stranger, a man with cold, dead eyes and a mouth twisted into a snarl of pure reptilian fury. The air in the small, sterile viewing room crackled with a sudden, violent energy. "You!" he hissed, the word a venomous dart. He wasn't looking at the documents anymore. He was looking at me. "You did this. You went snooping, prying into things that are none of your business." His immediate, reflexive response was not remorse or confession, it was blame. In his world, the crime wasn't his decade of deceit. The crime was my discovery of it. I didn't flinch. I had spent the last 2 days imagining this confrontation, and the reality of his unveiled monstrosity was no longer a shock, but a confirmation. "Your business?" I replied, my voice as cold as his. "You made it my business when you built my entire life on a foundation of her supposed death. I think I had a right to know the foundation was made of sand." "She was a liar," he spat, his hand gesturing dismissively at the passport, at the proof of Laura's survival. "A selfish, manipulative woman who couldn't appreciate what she had. She ran away from a perfect life." "She ran away from you, David," I said, the words sharp and clear. "She faked her own death to escape you. What kind of man inspires that kind of desperation?" He took a step toward me, his body radiating a menace I had never seen before, but had always, on some subconscious level, sensed was there. "A man who loves completely," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "A man who gives everything. She was my world, and she threw it all away. And you were supposed to be different. You were supposed to be grateful." There it was, the truth, uglier and more twisted than I could ever imagined. I wasn't his partner. I was a replacement part. I was the second draft, the corrected version of the wife who had dared to have her own well. My perfect life was a carefully constructed cage designed to prevent a second escape. My gratitude was a required part of the performance. The bank's vault, which had felt like a trap, now felt like a sanctuary. We were on neutral ground, surrounded by security cameras and silent witnesses. His power, the power he wielded within the walls of our home, was useless here. "Grateful for what?" I asked, my voice rising with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "Grateful for the lies? Grateful for being a character in the tragic story you've been telling for a decade? You didn't heal from Laura's death, David. You weaponized it. You used it to make me love you, to make the whole town admire you. You've been feeding on the sympathy of a ghost you created." I reached for the documents in the box, the passport, the diary, my evidence, my liberation. He lunged for them, his hand clamping down on mine on the table. His grip was like iron. "You are not taking those," he said, his face inches from mine, his eyes burning with a cold, possessive fire. In that moment, I understood the true nature of his pathology. It wasn't just about control. It was about authorship. He was the sole writer of his own reality, and he would not tolerate a single unauthorized edit. Laura's escape had been a devastating rewrite. My discovery was an attempt to publish it. "It stopped being your story the moment you made it my life," I said, my voice shaking but defiant. I tried to pull my hand away, but his grip was too strong. We were locked in a silent, desperate struggle over a pile of papers in a bank vault, a battle for control of the truth. Suddenly, a sharp, polite knock echoed on the viewing room door. "Everything all right in there?" The bank employee's voice called through the thick metal. "You've been a while." David's head snapped toward the door. His grip on my hand loosened for a fraction of a second, his predator's instinct momentarily distracted. It was all the time I needed. I ripped my hand away, grabbing the passport and the diary. I stumbled back from the table, clutching them to my chest. David stared at me, his chest heaving, his face a mask of pure, impotent rage. He was a king who had just been checkmated. The knock came again, more insistent this time. "Sir? Ma'am?" I looked at David.
at the monster stripped of his story, and I made a decision. I walked to the door, my hand closing around the cold metal handle. This was not a fight I could win in this small, airless room. The next battle had to be fought in the open, in the real world. "I'm leaving, David," I said, my voice clear and final. "And I'm taking the truth with me." I opened the door, revealing the concerned face of the bank employee. I didn't look back at David. I walked out of the vault, past the rows of sealed secret boxes, and into the bright, unforgiving light of the bank's lobby, leaving my husband alone with the empty container and the ruins of his perfect, tragic lie. Walking out of that bank was like surfacing after having been held underwater for 10 years. The air in the lobby was just air. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows was just sunlight. But it all felt different, sharper, more real. I clutched the diary and the passport to my chest, my hands shaking not with fear anymore, but with the pure, potent adrenaline of a successful escape. I didn't go home. The house on the cliff was no longer my home. It was his stage, and I was done being his actress. I went to the one place I knew he couldn't immediately find me, a small, anonymous hotel in the city's bustling downtown. From the sterile quiet of my room, I began my new life, a life of strategic disassembly. My first call was to a lawyer, a woman whose name I had gotten from a friend, a specialist in high-conflict divorces. I told her the entire, unbelievable story, a narrative that felt more like a movie plot than a marriage. She was silent for a long time on the other end of the line, and for a moment I feared she wouldn't believe me. "So, to be clear," she finally said, her voice a low, controlled hum of professional fury, "your husband's entire identity, and by extension, your entire marriage, is predicated on a fraudulent death narrative which you now have irrefutable proof is a lie?" "Yes," I whispered. "Good," she said, the word sharp and definitive. "That's a very, very good. Don't go anywhere. Don't contact him. I'll have the paperwork for a restraining order and a divorce filing ready by morning." My next step was more difficult, more personal. I had to find Laura. The documents in the safe deposit box were a starting point, but they were 10 years of a cold trail. I knew I couldn't do it alone. I hired a private investigator, a retired police detective with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I gave him a copy of the passport, the bank information, and the diary. "I don't just want to find her," I told him, sitting in his cluttered, dusty office. "I need to understand. I need to know what I'm up against." While the legal and investigative wheels began to turn, David's reaction was predictable. He tried to control the narrative. He called my phone dozens of times, leaving a series of voicemails that were a masterclass in psychological manipulation. They started as the pleas of a heartbroken, confused husband. "Sarah, please, come home. We can talk this out. You're not thinking clearly." Then they shifted to threats, veiled in the language of concern. "You're having a breakdown, Sarah. Your friends are worried. I'm worried. If you don't come back, I'm going to have to get you the help you need." He was trying to build a case against me, to paint me as the unstable, hysterical wife who had stolen a few documents and run off. He was trying to discredit his only witness before she could take the stand. He also, as I expected, went to the police. He filed a missing persons report telling them his fragile, grieving wife had vanished, possibly in a state of deep depression. A kind, handsome local hero whose wife was now tragically missing. The story was perfect. The police were sympathetic.
They called my phone. I didn't answer. Instead, my lawyer sent them a crisp, formal letter informing them that I was safe, that I was not a missing person, and that all future communication should be directed through her office. The official search was called off. Checkmate, David. Days turned into a week. I lived in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the next move in a chess game I was only just learning to play. The private investigator called me first. "I found her," he said, his voice calm, matter-of-fact. "She's not as far away as you'd think. Living a quiet life, new name, new identity, but it's her." My heart pounded. "Is she okay?" "She's alive," he said, "and she knows you're looking for her." I was discreet, but a woman who has spent a decade looking over her shoulder knows when she's being watched. "She wants to meet you." The idea was terrifying. Laura was not a ghost or a character in a diary. She was a real, living woman. A woman who had gone to the most extreme lengths to escape the man I had married. What would she think of me? The woman who had so willingly, so blindly taken her place. But I knew I had to go. She was the only other person in the world who knew the real David. She was the author of the book I was now living in. The meeting was arranged for a neutral location, a small, quiet park in a town an hour away. As I sat on the designated bench, watching the autumn leaves fall, I felt a lifetime of anxiety. Then I saw her. A woman walking toward me, her face older, her hair a different color, but her eyes were the same as the ones in the photograph on David's bedside table, the photograph he had claimed to look at every night. But her eyes weren't sad or tragic. They were sharp, intelligent, and wary. She sat down on the other end of the bench, leaving a careful distance between us. We were two strangers, bound together by the same lie, the same man. "You're Sarah," she said. It wasn't a question. "You're Laura," I replied. She gave a small, sad, bitter smile. "I haven't been Laura in a very long time," she said. "So, you found my diary. I always wondered if anyone would." "I found it," I said, "and I believed you." She looked at me then, a long, searching look. "Good," she finally said. "That makes one of us." Sitting with Laura on that park bench was like meeting a ghost from a past that wasn't mine. We talked for hours. She filled in the gaps the diary had left, painting a portrait of a marriage that had started as a fairy tale and slowly devolved into a gilded cage of psychological control. She had seen the darkness in him long before I had, a possessive, narcissistic streak that masqueraded as romantic devotion. Her faked death was not an act of malice. It was an act of pure, desperate self-preservation. She had created a new, quiet life for herself, a life that was constantly shadowed by the fear that he might one day discover she had outsmarted him. "He's not a killer," she said, her voice a low, steady murmur. "He doesn't want to kill your body. He wants to kill yourself. He wants to own your story, and he will burn down anyone who tries to take the pen out of his hand." In her, I found not a rival or a ghost, but an ally, a woman who had fought the same war and had, against all odds, survived. My story validated hers, and her survival gave me hope. We were the two sole members of a club no one would ever want to join. Armed with Laura's testimony, which she agreed to provide in a sworn, notarized affidavit, my legal case became an ironclad fortress.
When my lawyer presented this final, irrefutable piece of evidence to David's legal team, the living, breathing testimony of the sainted dead wife, the fight was over. His entire narrative, his entire identity was annihilated. The divorce was a quiet, brutal affair, settled out of court. He lost everything. The house on the cliff, the assets, the reputation. I didn't want his money. I wanted his story. The settlement included a non-disclosure agreement, but it was on him, not me. He was legally forbidden from ever speaking about me, about Laura, or about the boating accident ever again. He was silenced. His ability to control the narrative was legally and permanently stripped from him. He moved away, a disgraced man with no story to tell. He became a ghost, just as he had tried to make Laura one. The town, once so enamored with its hero, was left with the quiet, ugly truth, a truth that filtered out through whispers and rumors. The bronze plaque in the town square was quietly removed one night, leaving a blank space where the hero used to be. I sold the house. The beautiful view of the sea now looked like a crime scene, a vast watery accomplice to his lie. I used the money to start a new life, a real one, in a new city. I kept in touch with Laura. We are not friends, not exactly. We are something different, survivors of the same shipwreck, forever bound by the man who had tried to drown us both in his fiction. My life is quiet now, and I'm learning to trust the silence.
I'm learning that real love is not a perfect, flawless story. It's messy, it's unpredictable, and it is built not on a grand narrative, but on thousands of small, honest moments. It's a story you write together, day by day, not one that is handed to you, fully formed and beautifully tragic. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had never found that diary. I would still be living in that beautiful house, the happy, adoring wife of a local hero, my life a perfect, comfortable lie. And it leaves me with a question that I still ponder. A question about the nature of happiness and the price of truth. My ex-husband created a perfect, loving, and supportive world for me, a world that made me feel safe and cherished every single day. But that world was built on a monstrous lie. Now I live in the real world, a world that is sometimes difficult, lonely, and imperfect. So I have to ask, is a beautiful lie better than a painful truth?
Don't forget to like and subscribe. I post new stories every day.